Hey guys, TC Mabe. Just wanted to give you a real quick getting started with ACF example 425 video. You've already installed everything into your engine as far as the plugin goes, and you've downloaded your sample project and extracted that to a local directory. What you want to do is go into the directory and right click on the ACF example U project and say open. If you get a rebuild error, you want to go ahead and say yes to rebuild that. And in order for that to work, you're going to need the latest version of the Unreal or of the Visual Studio and the .NET compiler. Just make sure that you let that thing run for a little while, and it should launch your project shortly after the rebuild. Once your project is loaded up, you'll typically get this window to manage new plugins, and the project files are out of date. I usually just say update. Go to manage plugins. You'll see that your Ascent Combat Framework is enabled. I typically go to built-in and VR because a lot of times the VR for me is turned on, and I'll just disable those and then simply say restart now and close out any of my VR stuff. Once the project reloads, you can close this window and you should have something that looks kind of like this. Under your view options, you want to turn on show engine content and show plugin content, which should expose your Ascent Combat Framework content folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this into the localized directory for the plugins for this particular project so that we can make changes to the example without modifying the original. And what you want to do is basically highlight this folder, right click and say show in Explorer. And this is going to take you to the plugin marketplace Ascent Combat Framework directory for the content. You're going to back up one folder, or two folders rather, to the Ascent Combat Framework. Right click on this and just say copy. You can go back to your launcher, go into the library, and you should have your example project. You can right click on that and say show in folder. And then when you come out to this root folder, right click and say new folder. You're going to call this plugins with a capital P, L-U-G-I-N-S. You're going to open the plugins folder, right click and say paste. And that's going to bring all of the plugin content into a localized plugin directory for you. And when that completes, what you want to do is close your project. And once it unloads, just go back in and open it back up. And the reason we're doing that is to make sure that it's using the local version instead of the engine version. And I'll show you how to verify that in just 1 second. So once this comes back up, basically you can go in here and take off show engine content and leave show plugin content on, and you should still see this folder. And if you want to verify the correct location for this, you can right click and say show in Explorer and verify that the directory is actually your ACF example 425 plugins local directory there. So if that all worked for you, you should be able to hit the play button now, and you're going to get this error that says that the ACF item button widget blueprint has a compiler error in it. If you click on that and then say cancel here and close that little pop-up message window, it should take you into the widget blueprint. And you can go to the graph, and the error is highlighted here. So what we're going to do is basically reroute all this and fix it. I'm going to move these out of the way for a second just to show you what we're doing here. So we're going to right click out here and type in append, and we're looking for a string append. And then we're going to add one pin, and we're going to put a X in the B section of that. We're going to come out of the count into C, and we're going to come out of the name of the item descriptor into A. And then from the return value, we're going to go to the text in string. And then from there, we can highlight our broken append and delete it. Highlight these other two nodes and delete those as well. And basically, that should fix that error. This has changed, I guess, since one of the earlier projects. It just needs to be updated. You should be able to compile that now, close it, and go back out and say play. Once you're in the window here, if you interact with the items, you can hit your WASD keys to move and your left and right mouse to move around. Your left and right mouse buttons, the right button is actually a targeting window when you have a weapon on you. But if you walk over to an item, you can hit E to pick those things up. And if you hit the I button, you'll see your inventory. Now in the inventory panel here, if you move your mouse around a little bit, you'll see that it actually hovers over top of the items that are in here. And you can see with that little U icon what is actually enabled as far as what's equipped. And the reason it looks like right now maybe not much is going on is because you don't see the little mouse cursor. But once you hover over this, if you just left click, it will expose your mouse there. I'll show you how to fix that in just a second so that you can actually have your mouse whenever you hit I and take it away when you're done with it. But if I hit F11 and go back out here, I'll show you where we should be able to find that. I'm going to hit the stop button temporarily. I'm going to go up to the ACF example project, and we're just going to look around a couple other things, and we'll go in and fix that in a second. So the first thing you want to get familiar with in here is if you go to settings and project settings, this is where your information is for what you've installed. The three major components of the Ascent Combat Framework is that you're going to be using gameplay tags, which are in this project by default because it's already been loaded as part of the sample. But if you don't have the sample project, you're going to have to build these for yourself. There's a couple of videos from Mighty Mouse 3, which are also linked in the description of the tutorials directory, I believe, or maybe even some of the links in the ACF links directory in the Discord channel. And you also have stuff from One Silverleaf also located in similar locations to be able to do that video as well to see how this works. But inside of here you have your actions and your move sets and everything are all defined through gameplay tags, through the advanced RPG section under the engine, and also under the Ascent Combat Framework directory or section under the engine as well. So these are all explained in later videos, but here's where they are in case you're looking for these. They're also explained in the documentation. All of the tags and information are explained inside of the document for the Ascent Combat Framework documentation. It tells you about the system. It tells you about how to set the plugins up and make sure everything's working. It shows you about the hierarchical nature of the tags and the gameplay system, attribute setup, and everything else all in this document. It also explains a lot of your components, and there's a document as well that shows you the hierarchy of these project items. And I want to show you that real quick. There's a class diagram section in here, and basically what you're seeing is the hierarchy of how these things are built. So in what you're seeing is that like an ACF melee weapon is of type weapon, and a weapon is of type equipable, and equipables are ACF items, which are actors. So all your ACF related stuff is in here, and this is the inheritance nature basically of this, or whatever the root classes are, or the parent classes of these objects. And where you would see this in practice is if you are inside of the project and you go into, for example, a blueprint section, and you were to create a new blueprint. So you go in here and say you want to create a new blueprint under the class of ACF, and you said, for example, melee. If you could spell. The melee weapon you see here is a weapon, which is an equipable item, which is an ACF item, which is an actor. That is the same hierarchy that you are seeing in this framework documentation. A melee weapon is a weapon, which is an equipable item, equipable, which is an item, which is an actor. So that explains a little bit about what's going on in this document, and that he has it in here for most of the things that are in this. Attribute modifiers, the whole 9 yards are all explained. So a lot of your answers can be found in this document. All of your blueprint things can be exposed directly, or all of these modules are exposed to blueprints where you can make changes and everything. And this tells you how to create your character, a little bit about the animation system, how to create items and equipment, so on and so forth. So make sure that you refer to this document for a lot of the things that you're having questions with. But I also want to explain to you that in your example project here, you have a character. So if you go to Blueprints, Characters, so here inside of your ACF sample player blueprint, you'll find a lot of the mappings for your character as far as your inputs for sprint, how to interact with objects, your jump key, attacks, etc. That's all in here. There's also a couple of functions that you'll be able to check out in a little while, and the components that make up your character are also in here as far as the things that we talked about in that document. They're covered in great detail in there, and a lot of them you can just figure out by clicking on them and filling out the blanks in their ACF section. But the other thing you want to look at is in your sample player controller, which is found under blueprints, ACF sample player controller blueprint. You have two different mappings in here. One is for the J key, which shows the possessed character's statistic information, and another one, which is the I key, which shows your player's inventory. Now, one of the issues that I had with my inventory was that when I was playing the game, playing the sample project, the inventory was not showing up correctly. So if I go over here and I equip a couple of things, and I go over and I hit the I key, let me hit F11 so it's a little bigger. If I hit the I key, you can see that this panel, I can interact with it, but you know, it's kind of like not real intuitive as to what's going on there. So what I did with mine to fix that is I went into the ACF sample player controller blueprint, and under the add to viewport section, if you drag a wire off of here and type in input game mode, or input mode rather, which is going to come up as a set input game mode. I said input set mode rather to game and UI, and you drag a wire off of here and you say set show cursor, and you want to make that active, and then the player controller, you just want to get the local ACF player controller. And then on the remove from parent side, you want to do the same thing, drag a wire out and say set input mode to game only, and also drag a wire out to say set show mouse cursor, and we want to set that to just not be turned on. So basically inactivating. If we go in and come off here again to the player controller, you can either drag this wire over and link it to the same one there, or you can just say get local ACF player controller here and compile. Now what's happening here is when you hit the I key, there's a flip-flop. If the panel is already displayed, or if the panel is not displayed rather, it's going to go down the A path and it's going to create the inventory widget and add it to the viewport and pull that up and show your mouse cursor and basically switch your game mode over for you now that we added that in there. If the panel is already active, it's going to go down the B path, remove it from the parent, turn it back to game mode only, and turn your mouse cursor back off. So if you set those up and compile everything, when you hit play and F11, go back in here, and we're going to go and pick up some of our items. I usually just wait for those guys to start running away so I don't interact with them just yet. And now if I come over here and hit the I key, I should have a mouse that I can go and interact with this panel. And, you know, I can click on items here and everything. And then when I'm done, I can just hit the I key again and it'll take me back into my game mode. Now, a lot of times it'll look like nothing's happening here because what you have is a couple of the same items that you've picked up. So you've got 2 bows, a couple of swords, and some health potions, and they're all occupying current slots. So we're not really changing anything here. But if you create a new item, you could pick another item up and show the difference between what is and what isn't equipped. So we're going to do that real quick just to make that a little bit more explained. So what I'm going to do is go out to my launcher, and I'm going to go into my library, and I'm just going to go down. If you don't already have it, go in and look for Infinity Blades. You can get this off the marketplace. I'm just going to go and grab the Infinity Blades weapons and just say add to a project, and I am going to put that in my ACF example project. Just highlight it and say add to project, and then let that install. And once that installs, we'll go in and we'll duplicate an item or create a child and show you how that works. Okay, now that your Infinity Blade weapons are installed to the project, we can go back in here and we should have a folder for Infinity Blade weapons. And we'll just go real quick and look at the different ones we have in here. Here's another blade section. Look at our swords. And I don't know what all we have in here. What's a Blade Hero sword look like? Okay, so we'll equip this. And then I'll show how to make it work. So we have our SK Blade Hero Sword 10. I better remember this name. So we're going to go into the ACF example project, and we have some blueprints in here for items. And you already have examples of each different type. So you have a sword, a projectile, a health potion, and a bow. What I'm going to do for now is just duplicate this ACF sword, I'm going to right click and just say duplicate. And I'm going to call this whatever that other name was. And I'm going to call it that and put an ACF hero sword. So ACF, it doesn't have to be this way, this is what I'm doing. So it'll hopefully be a little bit easier to find. So ACF hero sword, I can now go into this, and this is where you can set all the properties for this. But the first thing I want to do is just set the skeletal mesh. So I'm going to go in here and search for that asset, which was our SK Blade Hero Sword, and just change it to that. And should be about all we need to do. You can change properties in here. If you go down under the different component information, there's a lot to scroll through here. But under the ACF weapons section, you can go in there and change what item tags are driving the behaviors of this for the movement sets that you use when it's equipped, and the type of item that it is and type of damage it does. You can also change some things down here in the item properties and the item information as far as its currency values, damage, item weight, all that kind of stuff. And that's all explained in the documentation or in any of the other videos. But for now, I'm just showing you real quick how to make another item. We can throw that in there. Now, in order to create an item in the world, we can either duplicate one of these or we can go find that. So an ACF world item blueprint, say browse to asset. And if I just drop this into the world, it's going to ask me what type that is. And I can go in here to the details section, and under the blueprint for the ACF, I can just go in here and say I want to add an element, and the element is going to be the item class. And under the item class, I can go in here now and say I want to get my ACF underscore hero sword. Okay, and I only have one of those. So I'm going to say save current. Go out here and hit F11 and Alt P to play the game. And now if I go over here, I got my new sword. I can go up and pick up a couple of different items. Now, if I go back to my inventory, and you can see here I should be able to equip that, and it's going to do all the same things that a normal sword should do, almost. It won't do any damage right now, and it's because I haven't actually made it a weapon. I'll show you that in a second, but I just want to show you that if I hit the I key now, you see that I still have swords listed in here. I don't have it listed as a different type of sword, so what we want to do with that is go back to our blueprint for that weapon, which is listed back under items, ACF hero sword. We're going to open this back up, and there's a section in here that asks us what the name of that is. Down in here somewhere. Should be right here. So ACF sword. I'm going to call this, we'll just call it ACF hero sword. One of the things we can scroll down in here and we'll see that there's a section under ACM for the damage traces on here. And there's a thing called a start socket and an end socket. So what we want to do is we want to go and put that start and end socket onto our weapon. And then this also gives us a radius for that if we have to adjust it or anything. Okay, if we go into our ACF hero sword, double click. If you don't see this panel, you might see a thing that says edit blueprint, and it'll take you into this. But basically, you can go in here now and go to the mesh and go down to the skeletal mesh, hit this magnifying glass to locate where that is. And then we're going to go out to that skeletal mesh, double left click it. And what we want to do is under the root section, we want to do add socket. And we're going to call this socket start. And we're going to go back to the root and add another socket. And we're going to call this this socket end. And then you just want to switch over to your transform tools to select and translate. And go over here and drag that up towards the end of the item. And we'll just bring it up to where it's in the range where it does damage. And you can also move the start socket up a little bit towards the bottom of the blade if you want to. Not necessary, but what this thing basically does, it takes that start and end socket that was identified in the blueprint under the ACM section. Under the collision component, under ACM for damage traces, that's where this DA is at for start and end for the sockets, and then the radius and what type of damage it does and all those different things. So you can go in there, that's what those sockets are for, but that's where you find them under the collision component for that. And Let's go back into our inventory. And for the inventory, there's actually a thing we need to set up real quick. So you want to go into the Ascent Combat Framework content directory, and you want to go under the UI, and you're going to look for ACF item button widget blueprint. And this is that block that comes up in the panel in the center. Basically, want to go over to the graph section of this, and there's a button in here, which is actually the button of each of the items. And if you just create an on-clicked event for that, basically from there, what you want to do is set this to equip your items. So the way that you would do that is you come off, you drag a wire out here, and you're going to say equip item from inventory. So actually, you got to do it the other way. When I set, sorry, you want to say get local ACF player character. And from the player character, you want to get a equipment component. So type in equipment. And you're going to see the get equipment component. And then from the equipment component, you can come over here and say equip item from inventory. And you can just drag the pin over to connect that. Or wire rather. And then the item that you want is this item over here. Or I'm sorry, not that item. You want the inventory item. Sorry. You want to say get inventory item. And then just connect that to the item pin. And compile that. Should be good to go. And now what should happen is when we're in our panel out here, if we go over and pick up our items, oops, using the wrong keys over here. Now when I hit the I key, I have a list of things. I can see my hero sword is equipped. If I click on the other sword, I now have the ACF sword equipped. And if we want to see that in a little bit better lighting, let me move out here. So you can see that I have my ACF sword equipped there. And if I go and now click on the hero sword, it'll equip the hero sword back onto my back. And I can left click and pull that off as well. Now I have the hero sword. And if I take this off, I should be able to go over now and do damage with that new sword. Okay. That's how you create a new item and equip it in your inventory panel that comes with the ACF by default. If I hit the 3 key here, it's going to give me my bow. I can right click the target. And now I'm going to probably get my ass kicked by these guys. Right now they stun on hit, so if you just get close to them, you can kind of keep them at bay. You can change all this behavior yourself. One of the big things to get your head wrapped around is that ACF is a bunch of predefined shortcuts and time savers for you to help you set everything up. And it's not necessarily the way to go do something. It's just providing you with a framework to build your own sets of tools and behaviors to work in. So some of these things may not act exactly the way you want them to, but like for the inventory, for example, what you're really getting is something that manages inventory items being inside the world and, handling the replication aspect of that. So it's kind of important to understand that, when people start talking about the inventory and everything, what Pask is actually giving you is the meat and potatoes of how the inventory objects have to interact. And this little panel that's out here is just one example of how you could very simply have a panel inventory or a drop down with some interaction buttons here. And again, you can just click on these to change what's actually equipped or unequipped in your inventory. But like I said, I think a lot of people get confused because you have the same items in here and you're not actually changing them, and then also the button doesn't work, I don't think, by default when you load this. But as you click on each of these things, the other thing that's interesting too is that this doesn't refresh to show you what's actually equipped or unequipped. So you click and come back in. So like if I went to this bow, you can see it switches over here, but you don't get that icon update until you come back in. So hopefully that explains a couple things. Now if you get done with that much of it so far, I think you'll be up and running to the point of where you can at least play around in here and get your head wrapped around what's happening. There's also a couple of tutorials from Mighty Mouse and from One Silverleaf, like I mentioned earlier, also in the sections there. And this all hopefully will help you. I'll come back and talk about some other things, but if you watch my other Getting Started video, you should see how to retarget a character and how some of the animation blueprints and things work for that character. If you haven't watched that yet, the real quick highlight reel is that under the ACF example, here's your ACF sample animation instance for that character. And if you retarget this character, what you should see in here under the class defaults is you have common actions, which can be defined by your different montages. And you also have moveset actions, which are defined by what type of weapon you have on. And the different types of montages that are played for those are under the actions. So for example, with this attack, you're going to play the sword attack montage. If you double left click on this, you'll see here's all the different notifications and cues and everything that are being sent to the animation component or the action component that goes with that. And where you can see that in here is right there. It says ACF attack action BP. And here's what happens with it and everything. And you can go in and set different variables and things in here right from this panel. You know, how it's going to take your stamina down by 25 points every time you swing your sword, for example. And we can talk about a lot more of this a little bit later on, but this should get you up and running. And again, this attack action blueprint, that is actually found under the ACF or Ascent Combat Framework section out here under actions. And there's your attack action. And so when you attack, you're passing in to these events that are in here. I don't think actually there's anything in this one by default. But that's where you would go in there and be able to override those things and add in all your different stuff that's in there. Okay, so some of these already have some stuff in them. And we'll get into that a little bit more in one of the future videos, but I just wanted to show you kind of a little bit about where things are located and how to get up and running. Hopefully this video helps you guys. Watch it with my other quick start video, and if you have questions, make sure you let somebody know. Take care and have a good night.